In order to understand Gothic architecture, firstly, let's have a look at before Gothic, which is Romanesque. The massiveness of Romanesque architecture is because of the warfare. That's why walls are very thick. In order to carry all walls, there are lots of structures. Structural masses dominated over voids and in which windows were kept small.
Who's that?
I came for prayer. But this place is very dark.
Yeah, because of the architectural problem, it's a light and dark.
Okay.
What's your question?
The problem in the Romanesque churches was that they were getting little light inside. So this problem pushed Romanesque architects to find new solutions.
But how was Gothic architecture style found? The answer is Crusaders. They started off to look for Holy Land. And during the trip, for when the first Crusaders saw Constantinople on their way to the Holy Land, they marveled at the size and the wealth of the city, and the vast scale and splendor of Hagia Sophia. For the Byzantine mind, Hagia Sophia was a physical representation of the fusion of empire and church. Hagia Sophia is much larger and imposing. All the wall surfaces of the West Church were extensively pierced with windows in the exterior walls and screens of arcades on all sides of the interior volume. The interior abounds exceedingly in sunlight and in the reflection of the sun's rays. Then they took what they saw as a solution and as marvelous to 6th Louis, who was King of France at 12th century. King was impressed and appreciated what he heard, and gave order to architects to work on this example. After all tries, architects achieved fine solutions and new style, and then the first Gothic building was constructed. It was Saint Denis.
When we try to find first examples of Gothic style, we can see Durham Cathedral from England. In 11th century, architects want to create higher interior spaces, and they want more light in the structures. Architects decide to create pointed arches. Thus, they can create more windows, and they use light in the structure, so the Gothic style starts.
What Suger and his architects and builders did was to integrate a number of improvements in late Romanesque church architecture, including pointed arches and rib vaulting. They created a lighter and more visually transparent architecture. What Suger wanted to replace walls of stone with membranes of stained glass, which filtered and transformed sunlight so that it symbolized divine illumination.
After the Saint Denis, we see that Gothic style in many countries, because of the fact that could be useful to look into Saint Denis and Notre Dame Cathedral.
Saint Denis is an important example for Gothic architecture, because this structure is the first religious structure which has Gothic architecture style. The opening up of the wall for stained glass windows was first achieved in the new Abbey Church at Saint Denis, begun by Abbot Suger about 1135. The interior had a lightness that made the walls appear to be rising and tied down by the columns rather than being massive and bearing down upon the columns, as had been characteristic of Romanesque vaults. Suger put his mystical leanings before unity of form. Stained glass, however, achieved both purposes. It produces the unreal and mystical Gothic light which softens the alternation of dark, and light in the moldings and also unites the space of a church by its atmosphere of mystery. Bronze and Denis on stained glass become one of the integrated elements of the Gothic style, influencing even the form of the windows, their shape and their size. By collaborating with Gothic architects, the painters were gradually stimulated into making their figures and compositions in Gothic. In St. Denis, the rows of windows were one of the means of creating continuity of space, and their subdued, colored light contributed to this impression. The interior and the exterior always develop simultaneously. Naturally, the architect tried to find a form for his exterior that would correspond to that of the interior. Let's have a look at Notre Dame Cathedral. This cathedral became well known by the musical of Victor Hugo. This structure is the best example for Gothic architecture because it used all features of this architectural style. There are also rose windows on the northern and southern parts of it, and because of the architectural style, there are circular windows, patterns and designed windows with pictures. There are also some towers in western front and they are 70-meter height. This cathedral also inspired by the lightness and structural articulation of Suger's church, which is St. Denis.
At an international level, Toledo stands out in Spain. But how? The reason is that it would remain mainland, Europe's most southerly outpost of monumental Gothic architecture. To better understanding how Gothic style started in Spain is also another important topic. After increasing relation with other countries, getting knowledge was increased by parallel to growing international communication in Spain. In that period, information about Gothic architecture style were learned. Therefore, this style was started to be seen as new solution and so as architecture type in there. As an effect of this cultural connection, much of Toledo's design can be understood as a response to Saint Denis and Notre Dame. But which extent is Toledo's Gothic style is similar with other ones, with its immense scale, huge double aisles, and soaring walls, Toledo is alike with Notre Dame. Also, its enormous width, great colored big windows, and length of aisle base are great example of Gothic architecture. As a Gothic example of England, Trinity Chapel can be given. This chapel was built before Gothic architecture, but after the death of Thomas Becket, who was Archbishop of Canterbury, Trinity Chapel were built in the new French, so-called Gothic style, the first time it had been used in England. With double columns of polished marble around the secretary of the shrine, arch-ribbed, vault system, and high decorated windows, Gothic architecture's features can be observed in Trinity Chapel, in which was part of Canterbury Cathedral.